breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James. So let's get started with a question. What is the most overlooked management skill?
So the first thing that I want to actually do is talk about the difference between management skills and leadership skills, because we often use them interchangeably, even though they're two distinct skill sets. So leadership skills are really about who the person is and how they make us feel. It's their confidence, their presence, their patience, and their character. And this is really about the people skills that we want and need from those in authority, whereas management skills are about how well they can organize and manage people to do the work. Management is really, it's about the competency of organizing and executing and using the resources that you have available to you. So if you are in a people management role, it's using people effectively. So with that caveat, the most overlooked management skill is the ability to set realistic expectations, which is kind of a the reason why it's overlooked is because it's not often thought of as a skill. Setting expectations is not something that's often talked about, but it affects everything that you do. And not only is it the most overlooked management skill, but it's also a skill that will improve your leadership.
Yeah, no, that's actually, thank you very much for actually going into those definitions first, because again, that is something that's actually a great takeaway on its own from this conversation.
And the podcast's done.
But the difference between leadership and management skills is a fantastic takeaway for people to someone just to take away in general. But absolutely, managing and creating realistic expectations is something that is so undervalued, but so important in so many aspects of our professional lives, that it is something like, if you're a professional who wants to kind of set a goal for yourself this year, being better at managing and creating realistic expectations will serve you exceptionally well. Mm-hmm. Now, managing expectations, when we say that, it's also really important for us to be clear that when we say that, to manage your expectations as a listener, is that they need to be realistic, transparent, and clear. Because as you said, kind of in management, as a skill, when you manage realistic expectations, you do that by identifying outcomes, by setting the realistic parameters of work, timelines, budget expectations, and you clarify what success looks like to you, or what either the subjective identification of success or the objective, clear industry or organizational expectation of success. And that is fundamental to being a good manager. Mm-hmm. That you're so transparent and you're so realistic about what you expect from people, when things are due, what they should look like, all the kind of stuff, giving that all to them and not leaving it up to them to figure it on their own. But as a leader, going back to what you were saying about kind of confidence and presence and how people feel, when you can manage realistic expectations, that is the fundamental secret sauce to building trust and creating autonomy and establishing a good rapport with your employees.
And for me, I think if I look back on I've had many managers over the years, and it's probably not going to come as a great surprise that it was identified to me that I am not an easy person to manage. I am great I do really good work. I'm not the easiest employee to have. So having our own business is definitely the right call for me. But anyways, There's one manager who I've had who always sticks out in terms of the best manager that I have had the privilege to work with. And what she did better than anybody else was she was very clear what I was not allowed to do. She set the box around what my role was, and was very clear that here's the limits of your authority. Here's the line that you cannot pass. If you pass it, I'm going to get in trouble and you're going to get in trouble. So don't pass it. Right? Very clear expectations, which helped me professionally because I knew that as long as I was within those bounds, I had the support of my manager, and the relationship that we were able to build was far stronger than any other manager, employee, supervisor. Like, it's the best experience I've had in being an employee, in being managed. And a big part of that came from their ability to set realistic expectations and understand that as somebody who naturally likes to push the bounds, there's a very clear cutoff line.
Yeah. And I mean, and that really kind of goes to a lot of what we talk about when we do some of our programs about building autonomy and building responsibility and internal motivation in employees, is that, when you create that box, or we use an analogy in one of our other courses where we talk about lanes, and you make it clear kind of where the lane or the borders on the box that you've been provided is, then it allows the person to use their professional judgment, to kind of have some autonomy, and to be able to do the job the best way that they can. And when you're really clear about the expectations placed on the natural and enforced consequences that come with going outside your lane or outside your box, then that makes that's creating those clear expectations. And it kind of even goes back to, we talked about this in another podcast about rules that empower and rules that restrict. And when managing expectations is one of those fundamental elements that create rules that empower. So rules, just as a quick refresher, rules that empower are when you tell people what they cannot do, meaning that like your manager did, you cannot cross this line, you cannot go past this, you cannot go over budget, you cannot miss this deadline, but everything else is on the table.
Yeah.
Where rules that restrict or tell people what they can do. You can only do this. You can only success can only look like this. And again, there's and rules that restrict are not necessarily bad, but when you have those rules that are clear, both restrict and empower, it is about managing expectations. But when you use it in more of we're trying to create more autonomy and more independence in employees, managing expectations to create those rules and empower is fundamental.
You're right. And if we look at what we hear as some of the big challenges that businesses experience in relation to their employees or their human resources, it's how do I retain good employees? How do I attract good employees? How do I motivate people? How do I build, like, we've had a lot of conversations with people about avoiding the pitfalls of micromanagement. How do I trust my team to do what they're supposed to do? How do I make it so that I don't have to constantly be hovering over people and watching every single thing that they do? Well, managing expectations is going to be essential to all of those things, all of those major problems that we've heard people talk about time and time again, and that we've talked about either in our podcasts or in our training. This is why I really believe the ability to set and manage realistic expectations is the most overlooked management skill, because if done properly, it will help you with your retention. It will help you with your attraction. It will help you build autonomy and self-reliance in your staff. And it will allow you as a manager to get out of the weeds and actually focus on supporting your team, not micromanaging your team.
Yeah, and I think that the main consequence of not setting and managing expectations is it allows for assumptions to take over. It allows for miscommunication, where one person assumes that they understand, or the manager assumes that they've explained it well enough, or they assume that the person is on the same page with them. And then when that assumption isn't met, when it falls through, that's when micromanagement steps in, because, well, I can't trust you to do the job because you didn't meet my unspoken assumption.
Yeah.
Then then that's when all this stuff kind of snowballs. But the thing is that, if we let assumptions take over, and that we hold people to those unspoken assumptions, that's a fundamental management mistake. And that lack of clarity and the trust that it hurts becomes a fundamental leadership mistake as well. Now, I've done a lot of interim and term leadership roles, been interim executive and interim department head and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that was, when I would go into a company or an organization that had that their leader was let go or left suddenly, or for whatever reason, one of the biggest mistakes that I had to do early on, that became my kind of go-to first move, was to make sure that realistic expectations were being set both up to those who I reported to the boards or partners or stakeholders, and down to the employees. So remember, I had one role where I stepped in, a very political role. And basically, one of the most fundamental mistakes that the CEO that I replaced did was they were terrible at setting expectations. Staff had no idea what was going on, and no idea what was expected of them, and they were horribly micromanaged. And the board and the stakeholders really were out of the loop and had no idea what success should look like. So this was an economic development entity. And what was funny was, when I stepped in, one of the first things I did that paved the way for clear expectations from the board and the stakeholders was I defined the difference between contribute and attribute, where I said that, we can't, as an entity, we cannot increase the GDP of the province, but our efforts of supporting small business, of building stronger relationships, of helping inspire new innovations and strengthen key industries, that you can attribute the success of those efforts to us, and those efforts contribute to the regional prosperity and all that kind of stuff towards GDP. And then once those were kind of clear about setting expectations about what they could expect from us as an entity, and what the staff's actions daily, how they had contributed to the bigger picture. It's just that simple explanation done well, and far more than this little quick summary. But that was the fundamental to setting everything up and returning the whole thing around. And then it was a matter of just following through and being transparent and being clear. And those actions are one of the things where, if that was done by the previous CEO, who was quite skilled and experienced and had lots to offer, but not doing that was their first step towards setting themselves up to fail. Right. And I think that this is something that, if somebody is aspiring to be a strong leader, or is currently in a leadership role, and they don't feel that they're getting the momentum they want, becoming committed to managing expectations will be a major boost for them if they commit to it.
Well, the big thing, so we've talked a bit about why managing expectations is so important. And it's really some of the core things from a leadership perspective, from your example, is the ability to create trust and rapport, right? We want our leaders, we want to be able to believe what our leaders say, right? When leader of an organization, leader of a whatever leadership position or role you are taking on, people need to be able to trust that what you say is rock solid, right? To the best of your knowledge and understanding, and your word is your bond type of mentality. That's a really important aspect in leadership, to being thought of as somebody who acts with integrity. So those, from a leadership perspective, managing expectations will go a long ways in terms of building your credibility and helping to provide trust in what you put out there. I want to go back to the management side of things, because there's a lot more to say about not only why managing expectations is so important in management, but where and how you can start to manage expectations. So I talked earlier, I mentioned that it helps in terms of your retention and your attraction efforts. And I've seen this, we both have done a fair amount of hiring over our careers. One of the biggest problems that I see in recruitment efforts is a lack of people don't manage expectations well in recruitment. So a few examples of how you can actually accomplish this. One major expectation that people will come into a recruitment setting with is around salary. If you can clear that up, I know I've harped on this point many times, but if you can set those expectations up front, it will help to alleviate a number of problems. Not all of your recruitment problems, obviously, but there's nothing worse than going through, like, writing tailoring your resume and cover letter for a position that sounds really interesting and that you're excited about, going through a phone interview and a in-person interview, and making it through multiple rounds of screening, only to find out that the salary expectations are far below what you were anticipating, or they're not meeting your expectations, right? From a business perspective, it is a tremendous source of frustration and a waste of time to go through and identify somebody who you think is going to be a good fit for the position, only to find out that at the end of it, when it gets to negotiating the salary, that your expectations are way off base, right? You can alleviate that entire frustration by just making clear what your expectations are in the recruitment, in the job posting.
Yeah, and I mean, and that, again, we've harped on that a number of times, but that is such a fundamental, essential piece of managing expectations in recruitment.
Yeah, it's not the only way to manage expectations in recruitment, though.
No, but it's a big one.
It is. So, I mean, some of the other, like, a big thing that that we've talked about before, and that I know that you did in some of your interim roles, was managing the expectations around the timeline for your recruitment. And that can be huge, right? Mm-hmm. The unknown creates anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety wrapped up in applying for a new job anyways. If you can alleviate some of the anxiety that people are experiencing, then you will see their truer self, and you will create a much better experience for you as the recruiter and for the person who's going through the application process.
Absolutely. Like when I would, again, I couldn't do this in all the roles that I was in, but I always strive to manage expectations as clearly as I could and provide as much transparent information, as possible. So I would even put in many of the job postings the timeline on when we were making decisions on, when we expected the first round of interviews to be. Again, like, putting a caveat of these are anticipated timelines, are subject to change, but at least putting them on there. Then when I would contact people for the interview or for the first round, I would give them. It would often be either solely through email or follow up with emails. So they had a written documentation of everything, and I would tell them, the interview times, and I would tell them the length of the interview. Often we would try and do. We give them like half an hour before the interview with some questions to prepare some more intentional questions. We would tell all that to them kind of in the interview, so that when they came in, they knew where to go, they knew what was to expect. And then in the interview, we would try and make sure that the expectations were clear on both sides, and that we would follow up with them afterwards, whether they moved on to the next round or not. And if they didn't, I would usually email them to say, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you coming in. However, we've moved forward with candidates that met our needs more specifically, but we appreciate your time and effort. Please feel free to apply for us again. No one loves getting the turned down email, or message, but the fact that they knew that it was over, and that it was just that they weren't the right fit, was something that I remember having someone come in for multiple interviews, and they got the job on their third time applying, and they said honestly that why they kept coming back and wanting to work for us was because of how transparent we were in the interview process. Like, that is the kind of company that I want to work for. Mm-hmm. And again, most of the time we were turning down phenomenal candidates just because we had to only pick one. So that was part of also building the brand for in the labor market.
Building the brand is a huge and important aspect, and we've talked about kind of how building your brand in the labor market in previous podcasts. What I wanted to jump on there, if I can actually remember now, because I interrupted you to say something and then I immediately forgot what I was going to say. But managing those expectations in the recruitment process. I think one reason why people don't do that is that they're worried about getting the question back of, well, why wasn't I successful? What did I do wrong? Mm-hmm. These types of people
wanting feedback or whatever.
People wanting feedback, which is totally natural. And sometimes you can provide feedback. You don't have to, though, right? Mm. And the key with the managing expectations is you don't necessarily have to divulge every piece of information you have, right? Being transparent doesn't mean that you have to give away every piece of information you have. It's about giving away the information that is relevant to the person that you're speaking with. And what's relevant in this situation is, you know what, we have a great slate of candidates, and we have chosen to move forward with, you have not been selected to move forward in our process. We encourage you to apply for future openings. It can be as simple as that, but that still helps to provide that closure, and it still helps to manage those expectations. And like you were saying, Kobe, it helps to build your brand in the labor market.
Absolutely. And I mean, so that's one example of the value of managing expectations in one aspect. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I think, I want to give a few more. Before we do, I want to also make it very clear, managing expectations as a manager to your employees is what we're really talking about. Mm-hmm. But there is also tremendous value if you create a psychologically safe workplace, which we've talked about psychological safety in one of our other podcasts before, so check that one out. But if you create psychological safety in your workplace and you allow for managing expectations to be a two-way communication where employees
Right.
can manage your expectations as a manager and be able to say, use the professional judgment. So you ask them something and they can counter to say, well, due to these things you may have not foreseen, this actually might be a more realistic, timeline, expectation, budget, whatever it is that you're setting the parameters on. If you can allow a culture that allows for that two-way communication of managing expectations, then there is an even exponentially greater value that you will bring to the workplace and to your management style.
Because just because you are managing expectations doesn't mean that you have set realistic expectations.
Excuse me.
And this is a mistake that we can all make, that we all fall into. The
So I
biggest
think that
piece that I want to I agree entirely that if you can create almost a collaborative approach or create an environment where people actually feel like they can push back and talk with you about what those expectations are, that is a huge value. But that doesn't happen by accident.
No.
And you mentioned it already, that you need a psychologically safe environment. Psychological safety is not something that just naturally occurs in our workplaces. It is something that needs to be done with intention. And people can go listen to old podcasts or previous podcasts, but psychological safety in a nutshell is how safe somebody feels to be able to speak up, to share their opinions, to voice their concerns without fear of retribution. It's not about confidence, how confident somebody is to talk. It's about, are people given the ability to push back, to share concerns, to speak up for what they need without that being held against them? That is the core of psychological safety.
And I think if we go back to the difference between leadership skills and management skills, to have the success as a manager, allowing for that two-way communication and managing expectations, the building psychological safety in your employees is more of the leadership skills that will empower that management approach. Mm-hmm. Because as a leader, if you make people feel safe and make people feel heard, that's very much a leadership quality. So this is when we say that the management skills and leadership skills, they're separate, they're distinctive, but they're very complementary. Right. And that's a great example of it. If you want to have the successful management practice of managing and setting realistic expectations to allow for two-way communication, then you need to have the leadership skills to provide people the psychological safety and in how that they interact with you. So I think that's probably a good way to kind of tie those two things together.
Yeah.
I also want so let's actually, now we kind of covered those things, let's kind of give some great uses of the managing expectations in a very practical, productive way. The first thing I want to mention, and you kind of alluded to it talking about recruitment and the anxiety piece, is actually managing expectations is a phenomenal addition to a wellness strategy, because anxiety and reducing anxiety is something that can be very useful to manage expectations to reduce anxiety. And that can be everything from big things like organizational change to small little interactions. Like a great example is if you're a manager and you have to meet with a member of your team, you're calling them to your office, you're setting up time to meet with them, and you send them an email, and it's like, and you want to say, can we have a quick meeting? If the person is someone that may be very anxious about that meeting, what does that mean? Am I in trouble? There's something wrong? Like what's wrong? And especially if someone suffers from anxiety, it could be a horrible situation. But if you instead in your subject line say quick meeting, good thing, That simple little addition could be a powerful way to go, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about it. I'm going
Yeah.
to have a good meeting with my boss. Great. That's very helpful, and be a great way to be a good practice to put into most of your communications to set those expectations in the subject line. And going back the other way, if you're an employee and you need something from your manager, like, so let's say you had a question for them and you need them to give you kind of some advice or recommendations. When in your subject line, you could say, question, need recommendation. Then you can send an email so that way they know when they're reading the email what you're asking of them. So you don't have to go back to them if they don't fully understand or they miss something. And then then you're clearly managing expectations on both ways, and that allows everyone, before they get into the email or before they get into the actions, to know what's expected of them, or to know or to know what's going to happen, or what's needed. That clarity
Well, and
could
it's
be
a
such
simple
a
thing,
powerful
right?
thing.
It's
Yeah.
it's a there are a lot of simple ways of managing expectations, and really at its heart, it's just about clear and transparent communication, right?
Yeah.
Most of what a lot of not most a lot of what we talk about is communication skills.
Mhm.
Right, how do you effectively like managing expectations is how do you effectively communicate those to people. And I love simplicity, and those are great examples of short, simple ways to manage expectations around that can help somebody alleviate some anxiety around being called to the principal office type of fear, right?
Right.
Especially if the environment, if you're just starting your journey to create psychological safety and it's not naturally present in the
Right.
workplace,
Mhm.
it can go a long ways to kind of building that trust and building that rapport that, not every conversation, not every time that I set a meeting with you to that your manager sets a meeting with you or a higher up sets a meeting with you, it's going to be a bad thing. Right. You don't need to stress. You don't need to spend the next 2 days worrying about what your manager is going to spring on you. Right.
Right.
Which
Absolutely.
can be huge. And not only for general wellness, but this can be a really important piece in managing people who are neurodiverse, because
Yes.
being able to clearly state what is expected will make a lot of things a lot easier in as how you communicate, how people then in turn perform the tasks that you have for them, and how you build that rapport and relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, because a lot of fundamental mistakes that happen with with people who are neurodiverse tends to kind of stem from assuming everybody is on the same page, that words have the exact same weight or meaning, or the stuff that you think is too obvious to mention. That's often that miscommunication, that on different page, or that incompatibility of assumptions, is really where it's a big part of some of the challenges, or some of the issues that arise when working with people who are neurodiverse, because part of that is they think about things differently. So
Yeah.
if you are very clear in telling them how they're going to be measured for success, or what task completion should look like,
Mhm.
or you put clear boundaries around things
Just
like,
setting that clear box, right?
yeah,
Like
or
setting
like,
those clear expectations of what, like, here's the things that you can't do. Here's what we need accomplished.
yeah, here's how long things should take. Here's what resources you should use. Here's the people that you should be going to if you have questions or need help. Those types of very clear, breakdowns, descriptions, one, allow you to as a manager, to make sure that you're, making providing enough resources and support to have the job done well. But two, you're also, not leaving anything open to inference or assumptions or anything like that, that you're very, intentional in how you communicate. Because, and the other thing too is that if you create that political safety and allow for that two-way communication, and if the person that is neurodiverse can almost repeat back what they understand or set expectations on how they may see a problem or a solution or approach that you didn't think about, then that can allow them to bring more to the table too, because there's a lot of power that can come from the neurodiverse and their unique way of thinking, because it's often unconventional. So there's great opportunities to listen to it. But I think the fundamental piece with both managing the neurodiverse and wellness strategy is just the clear fact that the unknown creates anxiety.
Yeah. And that's a big one. Like I've experienced that myself, right? Like I have struggled at times with, in the face of unclear parameters, when you feel like you can almost do anything, it can be overwhelming. Right. But putting a little bit of a box around what can be done, what should be done, really, I can't stress how much, like, I mean, for me, that is one of the core productivity tips that I have to adhere to, right? Whenever we're working on something, whenever we're developing something, I need to put that fence. I need to create the fence first, and make sure that I have clear in my head where the boundaries are. So I have to set realistic expectations with myself in order. But I mean, it's something that I find, if it's something that I need from a manager, but I'm not managed by anybody anymore. It's still something that I need because it's what allows me to be very successful. So I need to I need to manage myself. I need to provide that to myself. And it can be a really powerful self-productivity skill. It can be a very powerful management productivity skill. It can be a very powerful leadership productivity skill. It is the most overlooked management skill, in my opinion. And it is incredibly valuable and in almost every situation. You even mentioned before about managing change.
Right.
We have all been experiencing a buttload of change over the last couple years. Several, just minor tweaks here and there, nothing major, no global issues. Being able to set realistic expectations is a core piece of what we talk about in our organizational change management training. And we provide this training to HR professionals across Canada. This is realistic expectations is part of our dream method, which is part of our approach to everything that we do. Managing expectations needs to be front and center, whether it's managing expectations with clients, whether it's managing expectations with partners, whether it's managing expectations internally. It doesn't matter. It is such a valuable skill to learn.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I want to touch on that you mentioned, or you're saying about the self productivity piece, about kind of the self-regulation side of it. Because one thing that I think is something that we talk a lot about, and I used to teach you a lot about, was the psychology and the cognition of what's called choice overload.
Right.
When you're provided with too many possibilities or unlimited choices, you can actually make no choice or create no action. Like a fun example I used to use when I used to teach this would be going to your spouse tells you to go pick up some paint for the new room or for the bedroom that you're painting, and you go to the giant display in a hardware store of like a million swatches of paint, and you're just overwhelmed by the choice. And many people actually just leave. They don't actually choose one. Whereas when you set the parameters, realistic expectations, like if it's like for me, my wife will say, go get a teal in these from these numbers and pick one. So
Or she would probably just pin the swatch to your jacket. But
maybe I'm not a great example of making choices like that. But the idea of is, but if you give someone the parameters, if you shrink the choice from unlimited to a clear, manageable expectation of what success looks like, then it reduces choice overload, it reduces the anxiety, and actually creates better action and better outcome. So this idea of expectations goes beyond the workplace, but is something that is vital when it comes to management skills in a professional setting.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm gonna throw out a very nerdy example. I love open world video games. Love playing them, always have. But I also I'm replaying Skyrim for the 400th time. But these games, they drop you into an environment and you have full reign. You can do virtually anything. So oftentimes when I play these games, I'll start 18 different quest lines and then drop the game because there's so many things to do. It's like, where do you begin? And I get all scattered. So what I've been doing is, okay, this playthrough, I'm going to focus on this quest line, and this quest line first, and I'm going to get them go through to completion. And so I am such a nerd that I have to put a fence around my video game playing, right? It's maybe I should just stop talking now, but
but I think that, as funny example of that is that this really does speak to the versatility of the skill of managing expectations, and how it's something that can help you as an individual, both professionally, but also there's also values to your personal life too. I think the one last thing I want to just kind of make sure that we clearly mention before we kind of wrap up this conversation is that when we're talking about managing expectations both down to your employees and allowing employees to kind of speak back to you, we're not necessarily just talking about high level positions with high expertise. Even if you're managing entry level employees in the stock room of a grocery store, being able to say the delivery is here, put this away, you two put this away, could be, then you can be disappointed if they take too long or whatever. But if you're again clear and say, okay, you two, this should take you X amount of time, and then you should be able to be back on the floor, blah blah blah. But if you allow the employee to even speak back to you to say, well, the short staffed out front, we may get called up a lot. So if that happens, it may take longer than you expected, but we'll try and get it done by X time if that happens. Even that simple conversation could be a powerful way to improve how you manage, even in entry level positions. There's a lot of versatility and value that this concept brings.
It's a skill that spans every type of job, every industry, your personal life, your professional life, your management skills, your leadership skills. It is just an incredibly versatile tool that when you develop the skill, because it is a skill that needs to be practiced, you're not going to get it right every time, right out of the gate. You're not going to get it right every time, full stop. But if you continue to practice the skill of setting and managing realistic expectations, you will be a better manager, you will be a better leader. And if you can learn to use it for yourself, you can also be more productive.
Okay. So I think I'm going to just kind of wrap up this conversation with a quick summary. Okay. So again, the most overlooked management skill is as James said, is setting and managing realistic expectations. And this can be a powerful way to how you lead people. And because again, leadership skills and management skills are separate, they're distinct, but are very complementary. Leadership skills are about who the person is and how they make us feel as a leader or someone in authority. And management skills are about how well someone can organize and manage the people that work for them. So when we set and manage realistic expectations, they have to be both clear and transparent. Because when we don't set expectations clearly, it allows for assumptions to take over. And then people are holding each other to their unspoken assumptions, which causes a lot of issues and conflicts. Managing expectations in a two-way communication can build trust, autonomy, and rapport both ways, but it requires psychological safety. Mm-hmm. When you manage expectations, it can be a powerful addition to a wellness strategy, reducing anxiety on everything from big change to small interactions. It can be a personal productivity management tool that can help you individually self-regulate, but also help how you assign and describe work with intention to those that work under you. It's a fundamental component to having success managing the neurodiverse, allowing for a clear understanding of how success is going to be measured and what task completion should look like. And both of these, both wellness as wellness strategy and managing the neurodiverse, it's critical to understand that the unknown is what creates anxiety. Recruitment best practice can be increasingly leveraged by managing expectations with candidates, both everything from the job ad all the way up to communication after the final interview. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we at Roman 3 have as a component to how we teach and certify people in organizational change management, because managing change fatigue, reducing anxiety, and normalizing the stress of change is best done by managing realistic expectations at all stages. Okay, I think that's anything else to add, James?
No, I think that's a good summary, and I have talked enough.
All right, so that about does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video versions hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.